non-binary people, through shared learning and political education, through a pro-Black gender-affirming lens. So you are here because you registered for our Not on Our Watch webinar. Today is sort of the culmination of a year-long project, or even more so, working on a political education poster, also called Not on Our Watch. We're gonna talk a lot more about this poster later on. But today's webinar really dives into the content of this poster, breaking down what is e-carceration. Folks might be familiar, other folks might not be. So we're gonna kind of talk about what it is, how it's impacting many of our communities, and really what are the ways that people are organizing and resisting the expansion of state surveillance and state control. So we're gonna have a wonderful conversation with an incredible panel. We'll open it up at the end for a Q&A. And so I hope folks will find this fulfilling and we all walk away learning something new. I wanna take a second as well to introduce our panel. So first, I'd like to introduce Emmett Sanders. Emmett Sanders is a project researcher for Media Justice's Challenging E-carceration campaign. He is a formerly incarcerated researcher and writer who spent 3 months on electronic monitor. As a condition of release after spending more than 22 years in Illinois' prisons. Next, I'm going to introduce James Kilgore. He is a formerly incarcerated activist and writer. He is a media fellow at Media Justice, where he leads and heads the Challenging E-carceration Project. He is also a director of First Followers Reentry Program in Champaign, Illinois. Jillian Mendoza is a lead organizer at the YaYa Network, where she has organized to challenge the presence of metal detectors and police in New York City public schools. Uchechukwu Onwa is the co-director and coordinator of community organizing at the Queer Detainee Empowerment Project, QDEP. He advocates for LGBTQIA+ migrants facing criminalization by the immigration system. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by with Aniri Zapata. Aniri is a Black Garifuna and Honduran transgender woman who arrived in the US in 2015. She is a member of BLMP and a board member of QDEP, the Queer Detainee Empowerment Project, where she supports recently arrived LGBTQIA+ migrants. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it back to my co-moderator, Alex, who is gonna talk a little bit more about this poster project and dive us right into what is e-carceration.
Thank you, Basma. So we have been working on this project for a year now. We conducted research behind incarceration and also interviewed people who have been like personally impacted by incarceration. We have been working closely with other organizations like CUB, which I'm actually gonna pass it to CUB so maybe they could speak more about what we've been working on.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Mark Torrey from CUP, the Center for Urban Pedagogy, and my coworker Siona is also here, and I'm going to let Siona give you a one-liner about what CUP does.
Hi, everyone. I'm from CUP. CUP stands for the Center for Urban Pedagogy, but we go by CUP. And our work addresses the barrier of how hard it is to understand the complex policies and systems that shape our daily lives. We do this by collaborating with designers and amazing community organizations like Freedom to Thrive to create visual explanations of those tools, of those issues. So people have the tools they need to fight for their rights and to fight for justice. Mark, are you going to talk about the project now?
Yeah, so just briefly, this project is a part of one of our most well-known programs, Making Policy Public. And in Making Policy Public, we put a team together that's made up of CUP, design team, and a community group like Freedom to Thrive to create a fold-out poster like this one that explains a complex issue like e-carceration that the community partner works on. I'd just like to say, so I'd also like to call for just a quick second. The designers on this project were Shreyas R. Krishnan and Kritika. Oh no, I've forgotten Kritika's last name. Crap, I lost it. Sienna, can you give me Kritika's last name?
Susarla. I'll send their links into the chat so everyone can see.
Sorry about that. And they're amazing designers, and they helped us create this project along with Freedom to Thrive and with input from QDEP as well. And so it's the final product is a fold-out poster, and I think somebody maybe has a paper one that we could see and if they could hold it up and we could see that, that'd be awesome. I don't know if we have that under control.
Yeah, so I know we're dealing with different screens and we want to make sure folks are able to see the interpreters, but you're able to see my screen and we're sharing a screen, but this is a copy of the poster. So it opens many, many ways, and we will talk more about that.
Right, and so that poster will be distributed through Freedom to Thrive and other groups to constituents who can learn about e-carceration from the poster. This event that we're doing today, part of a piece of it is that this is our final launch of this poster that we've been working on for so long. And so this is an important piece of it because it's like, this is how we know that it's actually getting out into the world. And part of that, we'd like to also put up a link to the PDF. So there's a PDF version of the poster that you can look at as well, which I think Siona can put into the chat. And then on the slideshow, you're seeing some photos of what the process looked like. There's the collaboration with both QDEP and Freedom to Thrive, and part of the process of working with the designers to create the project. I think that's all I have to say. Basma, I don't know if you want to add anything about the process or Alex. Oh, you know what I should say? The folks who worked on the project at Freedom to Thrive, I'd like to call you guys out. So Basma, Marone, Alex, and is there anybody else we need to list? Danielle?
Yeah, thanks to everyone who supported. And here's some photos of the incredible members at QDEP who are also instrumental into making this poster possible. So we went through many testing sessions. Like Alex mentioned, the poster really came through folks' firsthand experiences, folks who've experienced incarceration and other forms of surveillance. So we went through many iterations to come to this final beautiful piece, and we want to get this into as many hands as possible. And so if you want a copy of the poster, please reach out to Freedom to Thrive. We will do our best to get it to you. So yeah, we again just thank you to all the members of QDEP who worked so hard as well on this poster. I think
and the last oh, go ahead.
No, go for it.
I was just the last thing from CUP is that Siona, I think, would like to make sure that you know how to find out more about our projects.
Yeah, so if you work for a community organization like QDEP, we currently have an open call to make projects like this poster. And so if you check out our website at welcometocup.org, 2 as in TO, you can learn more about this open call. Yeah, all the information is there. Thanks.
Awesome. And if we pull that slideshow up and we go to the next slide, Alex is going to walk us through what is e-carceration, pulling right from that poster.
Thank you, Basma. So what is e-carceration? Well, e-carceration is short for electronic incarceration. So this is when, there we go. So this is when authorities like police officers, immigration officers, use surveillance technology to track and monitor people. An example of this is house arrest. That's when an income monitor is placed on a person and they have their location tracked. But there are many other different forms of incarceration. The technology used to monitor and watch people has advanced and expanded over the years. Technology like mics, video surveillance, facial recognition softwares are now used in our regular stores, airports, and in our iPhones and more. While facial recognition seems useful and is convenient, there are major concerns about privacy and safety that we have to consider. Studies have found an increase in racial biases. The use of tracking location and social media has been used by the NYPD for race targeting. An example of this would be the NYPD gang database, and which the NYPD uses to choose individuals to be on the list based off what they follow or what they like on social media. Another example of this another form of incarceration would be surveillance in the community, like police towers. I know when I first moved to my neighborhood, I noticed police towers parked in like every corner. I also noticed police car constantly patrolling the area and the streets, stopping people at times. So all that can contribute to incarceration. At this moment, let's transition to the panel. So when I was growing up, I barely saw or really heard about income monitors or incarceration. Now that I'm older, I hear more and more about this in my community. This question, it could be to James, to Emmett, or to anyone else. Why have we seen the growth in incarceration, and when did it start taking off?
Well, I think this technology came into use for two reasons. First of all, it's really only taken off since we've seen the rise of the smartphone, which enables police and authorities to GPS track people's location and compile that data. So since we've seen the rise of the smartphone in the sort of like early 2000s, we've seen those who control that technology have found ways to increase their power and control over oppressed people through developing this surveillance technology. And I think that also went hand in hand with movements against mass incarceration, where people were pushing back against the expansion of prisons and jails and looking for so-called alternatives. But E-carceration, electronic monitoring, this is not an alternative to incarceration. It's punitive technology. So let's not talk about it as an alternative to incarceration. People talk about housing and mental health as alternatives to incarceration. Those don't need incarceration to exist. Housing is there as a necessity. Mental health is there as a necessity. They are not alternatives to incarceration. So even though people have pushed e-carceration as an alternative to incarceration, that's not what it is. It's a form of incarceration. It keeps people in their house, deprives them of their liberty, deprives them of access to employment, to healthcare, to credit, and to a whole range of other opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, James. I think that's super important in that I think policymakers, folks in office want to sort of applaud themselves for pushing for decarceration when in reality, the quote unquote decarceration, which is not abolition that they're pushing for, is these so-called alternatives like ankle shackling, like pretrial detention, like all of these other ways folks are under like state control and state surveillance. And I think that's a super important point. I wonder if Aniri and Uche want to comment a little bit about why e-carceration is still incarceration, specifically for folks who are migrants, for immigrant folks who are long been under like specifically higher surveillance and who are at greater risk of surveillance, especially for queer folks who are migrants and immigrants. So I wonder if Uche and Neri, if you all want to talk a little bit about how that shows up for the folks that you work with, and how, when given the option between e-carceration and incarceration, how that poses a really difficult choice for folks who might be coming out of detention, for example.
I'm gonna talk and then if Aniri has more to add to that, that would be helpful. But I think, again, like, thank you so much for Freedom to Thrive for this amazing poster. And, you know, QDEP is so glad that we are opportune to work with you guys on this. When we talk about, like, you know, incarceration, what people really don't understand is how the impact of incarceration, like, you can imagine what, as a queer person, because I work with queer folks, immigrant folks, and I'm also one, I identify as a gay man and also immigrant. You imagine what it means to go through all the struggles we have to go through in our home country. And just because, you know, we love differently from what society expects to be the right way to love. And we come to the US where we, you know, we have believed to be a place of safety and a land of refuge. And we have to go through, you know, incarceration in detention center. You have to be on, you know, you have to be taking orders from the guards, from ICE officers. You have to, you know, most people are even being isolated in solitary confinement, especially the trans people, trans women. They experience more harm, sexual abuse and harassment in detention. That alone has a lot of damage that it causes in people's life, mental health wise, emotionally and physically. And then you have to come out of detention and you know, you have to come out of prison or detention and you have to be under surveillance. And so, like, there is no difference, you know, from being in ankle shackles and also being in prison or in detention centers. I know that most people, like, you know, when they're given that options to choose, that they would choose e-carceration because to them, they want to be out of that horrible situation in detention. But again, like, you're coming out and you're still under monitors, right? You have to, you know, you have to check in with your ICE officers. Most of our clients that have ankle, like when I see them with the ankle bracelet, it hurt my feeling to see people have to go through that, especially during the summer when the weather is hot. You have to wear shorts with the ankle bracelet. So some of them can't even leave the location that they are. You know, I know some of our members that, for instance, live in Queens and they have to go to Brooklyn. They always get calls from the ICE officers saying that you're not supposed to leave that location. So ICE officers, they monitoring and tracking their movement. And when you, like, you know, you start getting that kind of calls and monitoring, like, it also brings back that memory of you being in prison or you being in detention. So there is no way that we can think about incarceration as an alternative to incarceration, because they are the same thing, and they are not supposed to, people are not supposed to be in that kind of situation.
Thank you, Uche. Aniri, would love to also hear from you on this. Thank you.
Ok. Buenas tardes, estoy muy agradecida por la oportunidad que me han dado de poder estar aquí. Yo siempre he dicho que cuando este país hace reformas, al negro y al migrante no lo incluyen para algo positivo. Siempre que van a hacer reformas, siempre la parte mala es la nuestra. Al hablar del encarcelamiento, yo que estuve en un centro de detención durante 6 meses, sé cuán difícil es salir emocionalmente de un centro de detención. Pues, a veces toma mucho tiempo salir físicamente, 6 meses, 3 meses. Hay personas que están muchos años ahí, pero las emociones, sacarlas de ahí, la salud mental, volver a la normalidad, es algo que casi nunca se logra y algo para lo cual se necesita mucha ayuda. Y al hablar de E-carceration, que la encarcelación electrónica, estamos hablando de lo mismo, porque aunque sales de un centro de detención, no puedes volver a tu vida normal o a tener las rutinas que cualquier otra persona podría tener, porque sabemos de, como decía Uche anteriormente, no se pueden alejar a ciertas millas de la casa. No puedes conseguir un trabajo porque tienes que estar cargando este dispositivo. También podemos hablar de cuántos rayos X o todo lo que ese dispositivo está lanzando para las personas, mujeres embarazadas o cualquier persona de cualquier condición, en cualquier condición en la que se encuentre. También quiero... estaba hablando de las condiciones, también quiero decir del desbalance emocional de estas personas. Yo tuve una hermana que estuvo con un grillete durante más de 7 meses en la casa. Ella tenía 2 hijos y una vez salió al parque con su hijo y al niño le preguntaron si su mamá era ladrona porque andaba un grillete, porque el niño tenía conocimiento que los ladrones o las personas malas andaban en un grillete. Entonces, eso fue algo bastante traumante para ella. Durante los otros 7 meses que estuvo con el grillete, no quiso sacar a los niños al parque. Y hay muchas otras cosas en las que estas personas que tienen un grillete, como decía anterior, salen de su total entorno. Cuando van a las calles, los miran de una manera diferente, le tienen algún tipo de miedo, no les quieren contratar. Entonces, la encarcelación electrónica es lo mismo que una encarcelación física, porque las personas no pueden volver a su vida normal. Es lo que quería aportar.
Thank you, Aniri. Yeah, I mean, we talk a lot in the poster around sort of the many different impacts of someone who is on an ankle monitor specifically. And we know there are many forms of incarceration, but ankle monitoring or ankle shackling is, you know, one of the most widely used forms of incarceration. And it's exactly, as you're saying, Aniri, you know, there's the mental, the physical impacts are so strong, and not only on the person who is wearing the shackle, but on their entire family, on their community, right? And so, yeah, I really appreciate hearing, you know, more from you. And we know that ankle shackling is something that's used both in the immigration system, but also on the criminal legal side. And so, Emmett, I would love to kind of open it up to you if you could talk, you know, as someone who experienced incarceration as a condition for release, just the way that incarceration also shows up in the criminal legal system, whether it's folks that are detained pre-trial or folks who are released on shackles as a condition of their parole.
Sure. So first of all, I think when we think of the traditional form of incarceration, I think it's One of the striking things to me is it's very easy to see the legacy of slavery. When you're on a bus with 60 other people and you're shackled to them, it's very reminiscent of that. It really calls it to mind. It's a bit more insidious when we talk about electronic monitoring. But when you're in prison, for example, your space is limited by concrete and steel. There are abusive overseers who hold all the power in the situation, limited access to health care. Your family suffers the effects. Rather than being like an economic asset to your family, you're an economic burden in a lot of cases. And you're not just separate from your family, but from the community as a whole, right? You suffer the civic and social death, in essence. And I think that although electronic monitoring is presented as this kinder, gentler form of this, the legacy still exists, right? It still persists. You have problems with employment, you have problems parenting. You can't take your children to school, you can't do basic things you need to do. We've talked to a number of people, and I've experienced it myself, where emergency situations arise with your family where they need health care, and you have to make a decision of whether or not to violate the terms of your electronic monitoring, to go and take care of your family, to respond to an emergency situation. So there's this continued denial of liberties that we see over and over again, and it's the same in traditional prisons as it is in traditional forms of incarceration, as it is in e-carceration. But I think another link too is in addition to the denial of liberty, we're talking about the commodification of Black and brown bodies, and that continues on. There's a long legacy of this. The same people that were making money off of traditional prisons, and they continue to do so, they're not going anywhere anytime soon, are continue to make money off of electronic monitoring, and the same people are being commodified. When you look at pretrial monitoring, for example, I think one of the things we really need to think about is the coercive effect that electronic monitoring can have on pretrial. These are people who have not had their cases heard, but sometimes the conditions can be so onerous they can't go to the store for a year, or like there are crazy things that actually happen, and these conditions can be so onerous that it can compel people to take pleas that are not in their best interest, and in some cases to even accept pleas of guilt when they haven't done anything at all. So I think that's something that we really need to consider as well. And when we're talking about post-release, the first 90 days of someone coming out of prison are the most important you could possibly imagine. That's when people put their lives together. They're trying to recover from, as someone else mentioned, the trauma of incarceration, the trauma of being in that situation. They're trying to find employment and get identity and all these other things. And this is an impediment to that. And so what it does is, after you've actually completed your sentence, it's extending that period of trauma past that sentence and into the home and into the family. So those are sort of the things that come to mind as far as like how these things are similar and how they sort of enact.
Yeah, thank you. And with e-carceration, we go to see e-carceration in our youth. When I found it weird, because when I first moved to New York from Florida, and was introduced to the high school system here in New York, noticed that from a young age, students are exposed to like metal detectors, police, schooling, and also like having things like checking out their phones out for the rest of the day. And this question is more towards Gillian. Can you talk more about like surveillance of students of color within the public schools, like before COVID, and how it expands now?
Yeah. So hi, first I'm Jillian. And so pre-COVID-19, 1 in 2 Black students and 1 in 3 Latinx students went through metal detectors to get to school. as opposed to 1 in 7 white and Asian students. I, along with my peers, interviewed many students across the city, collecting their experiences with metal detectors in New York City public schools. And what we found was that metal detectors created this preconceived notion that their peers, including themselves, are in danger or are a danger. This creates an environment that feels unsafe, anxious, and hostile. So students are made late to class, they're yelled at and practically harassed for carrying everyday items like water bottles or even their phones to school. It is really, really traumatizing for students. This policing / surveillance not only happens in high schools, but it also happens in middle schools. So I've had students describe to me how it made them feel like criminals. This is extremely concerning, especially because these are the most developmental years. Them being conditioned to believe that they're criminals is actively contributing to the school to prison pipeline, where youth are funneled into the prison system. So now, post-pandemic, and where there's being an increase in police presence in schools and a decrease in social workers and teachers, the city is inherently driving more trauma into these students in a time where students frankly need the most emotional support ever. Students in Black and Brown communities are losing family members and being affected by this virus like no other. Instead of making sure that students' needs are taken care of, the city is far more concerned with the surveillance of Black and Brown children and increasing metal detectors, surveillance cameras, and other policing equipment in schools.
Thank you. And as we just saw, like we talk about the how policing in schools affect students, and we just saw like the demands of the people be ignored by the mayor and our government. Instead of cutting the NYPD budget, they instead like they continue to fund the school safety agents, which are essentially cops. Instead they cut the city's youth programs and summer youth employment that they had in place to help these students. But just like you were saying, how much money of the school budget is used for policing in school, and where can we use that money instead?
Yeah, so around $400 million is used in the school budget towards policing, where that money could be used to increase mental health support in schools by increasing the presence of therapists and social workers in school instead of police. That money is especially needed to be put into other resources, as I mentioned earlier, especially during a pandemic where Black and Brown low-income communities have been impacted disproportionately. Furthermore, like teachers are also impacted by how poorly funded education in New York City already is. I've often seen my own sister, who was a teacher in Queens, have to buy stuff for her second grade classroom with her own money. All the colorfulness and playful aesthetic of elementary school classrooms comes from the pockets of teachers. I'm thinking that instead of putting money towards surveillance and policing in schools, let's put this money towards our classrooms too, so that teachers don't have to worry about taking money out of their own pockets to make school enjoyable for kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Jillian. Yeah, I think, you're touching on a lot of really important things, and, we find ourselves in an interesting moment, to put it lightly, but also a seemingly revolutionary moment. And I think for folks who are abolitionists or who are coming into abolition, there's just so much opportunity for folks to really get involved in a struggle and in a movement that's long been going on to sort of challenge the way our communities are policed and surveyed, and challenge these decisions about where money is allocated. And so the fact that in New York we had folks really examining the NYPD budget, which has consistently grown over the years. To have a multi-billion-dollar budget, it's wild when you think about the amount of money that gets ignored, that gets taken away from, mental health, from public health during a pandemic, from our school system. But we're in this time when folks are obviously taking to the streets. Folks are actively demanding abolition, which, at least, I'm not super old, but in my lifetime, I think it's been really hard to get folks to kind of engage in abolition. There's always been a lot of pushback, and I think now it's becoming, actually part of the mainstream, and people are really starting to question these systems that, like Emmett was saying, are direct legacies of slavery. And I know a lot of our panelists have been organizing around abolition and around ending e-carceration. And so we'd love to kind of dedicate the next sort of bit of our discussion to talk about some of those efforts and some of the organizing that's been going on. And so if we can maybe start with folks from QDEP, if we can. QDEP has been doing like amazing work for quite a long while, supporting queer immigrants, both inside and outside as folks are being released. And they've been leading the way around the Free Them All campaign here in the tri-state, for example, but also connected nationally for this call to free them all. And that the campaign is what the demand is. It's not about condition releases on ankle monitors. It's not about specific only release for folks who might be more at risk. It's about freeing everyone who is incarcerated, who is in detention. And so would love to sort of hear from QDEP about sort of some of the current efforts of Free Them All and how you've seen abolition or the ideas behind abolition expand under COVID.
Thank you so much, Basma. So I want to talk about Free Them All and also the intersection between prison and prison industrial complex and immigration detention, because these two systems are so interconnected. And most times when people talk about immigration, they tend to remove prison part of it. So when we're talking about freeing everybody, we need to always recognize those being locked up in the prison industrial complex and also those in immigration system. And also querying the narratives around immigration, because when most folks talk about immigration, we always center the heteronormative folks without recognizing the LGBTQ plus immigrants that are most often are being held and incarcerated by ICE. So we need to also start having that conversation around how do we create a narrative around immigration. So some of the efforts, that QDEP have been, involved in around freeing them all is, we have been organizing with organizations, immigrant justice rights organizations, organizers from New York and New Jersey around demands on how to free people during this difficult time. And we currently have an organizational sign-on that is going on. And also we have worked on executive other language that we will be sending out to the New York and New Jersey governors, demanding that they free everybody. And also they should end every transfer, because currently ICE are still, transferring people from facilities to facilities, and also putting the other ones at risk of, contacting COVID-19. And also part of our demand also is to end, as renewal of contracts within detention centers in New York and New Jersey. So that's some of the efforts, around freeing them all that we have been engaging on since the pandemic. And I want to say that the pandemic has also brought in a lot of opportunity in terms of releasing folks. For instance, before the pandemic, QDEP, we were providing support and services for about 160 people LGBTQ plus immigrant in detention. And since March to now, we have released 100 people, 100 of our members from detention, and we currently still have at least up to 60 people still locked up in detention. So we are not going to rest until we make sure that everyone is being free from detention. So we are continuing our organizing efforts around releasing people from detention, both locally and nationally. We are also engaged with other organizations and organizers working around the same demand, which is to free people from detention and also prison amidst COVID-19. And like I talked earlier about the intersection of prison and immigration, I want to give a little bit example on how these two systems intersect. Hector Mendoza is an immigrant that was deported recently around April because of some silly mistakes from ICE. Hector had been here for years and he was arrested by police. According to them, that he stole a pipe. And after a few days of him being incarcerated in the prison industrial complex, as he was released, ICE were already waiting for him. So ICE picked him up and detained him for about 3 months. And Hector was deported back to Mexico. And up till now, Hector was deported in April. Until now, we have not heard or seen Hector. All efforts to finding Hector have been to fail. So these are how these systems are intersect. Like if we are talking about abolition act, we should also be hammering on defunding the police and abolishing the police, because the police are not keeping us safe. They are meant to keep us safe, but they are instead victimizing, they're instead killing us. Police would go to where there are protests looking for immigrants to arrest. And from them arresting immigrants, they would transfer them to ICE, and ICE would then take them. And from there is automatic deportation. So we need to continue working hard in terms of not just freeing everybody, but also dismantling all those systemic operations that would otherwise harm us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's so important that we are talking system-wide, and we're not falling into that trap of only thinking about immigration over here and criminal legal system over here, but that the fight for abolition is the full fight for abolition of all of these systems. And when we bring it back to e-carceration, it's interesting because we're in this moment where there's such the pandemic has brought on like a resurgence or an upsurge in folks taking to the streets and folks mobilizing and pushing for full abolition. But yeah, when we think about incarceration, there's also this opportunity for co-optation, and kind of as we talked at the beginning, e-carceration gets thrown around as an alternative, as okay, we hear what you're saying, but we can't release everyone, and if we're going to release people, we're only going to release them in this way. And so there are a lot of ways that movement can be co-opted or is being co-opted. And love to hear from folks, maybe James or Emmett, if you could talk about some of the ways that the advance in technology and the expansion of incarceration is really undermining efforts right now around abolition.
Sure, if I can weigh in on an important effort to co-opt the struggle is switching from ankle shackles to cell phone apps. And I think to follow up on what Uche is saying and to make the connection between the criminal legal system and immigration, we've seen for quite some time, ICE has been using devices called a BI Smart Link and on immigrants to track them, and they use them to round them up in factory raids and so forth. And now they've been changing over to these devices for people on parole, for people coming out of jail who have been held during COVID, and they you download an app to your phone, and this app can track your location. It can demand that you show a video of where you are and all the people that you're with. It can force you to upload information about your daily activities and so forth. It's really a mini surveillance device, and it's sold as something that's attractive to people because it's a cell phone app and people are used to cell phone apps. And I just want to say that I got an email today from a company called Reconnect, which has just raised $3.7 million for one of these cell phone apps. And in the ad, they're saying, because of the uprising of Black Lives Matter, it's time to bring in new technology to solve the problems of incarceration and recidivism. So we can see that the companies on the other side are trying to reshape their technology, reshape their rhetoric in order to make it sound attractive, in order to make it sound non-carceral. But we know that I think an important point is to look at where is the roots of this surveillance technology. It comes from the military. And where is this most advanced in the entire world? This surveillance state is right in Palestine. So it's Israeli companies that are driving a lot of the e-carceration in the United States. Attenti and Supercom, Israeli-based companies which have created open-air prisons in Palestine, are now trying to replicate that using these cell phone apps and other kinds of e-carceration on Black, Latinx, and LGBTQIA communities in the U.S. So I think we have to be very careful about what happens with this technology, where it comes from, who are the companies behind it, and make sure we don't let them get that into the discussion about abolition, because it has nothing to do with abolition and everything to do with the perpetuation of incarceration.
Absolutely. And I think that link between technology that's designed for the military is often completely disconnected from the way the military technology is then shopped around to local police departments. It's shopped around to other agencies like ICE. And I'm really, really appreciative of you bringing that up, James, because I think in the struggle, as we're resisting the expansion of e-carceration, it's not just about police, it's not just about ICE, but it's about the military, it's about the entire military industrial complex, which the police are absolutely embedded in. So we are, kind of wrapping up a little bit. We have time for maybe a couple more questions. But again, just to reiterate, part of, the main reason why we wanted to develop this poster, which again, you can find the link in the chat and we're happy to mail it out, was we want to be making these connections for folks. We want people to kind of understand just how dangerous the expansion of e-carceration is, as well as to highlight the work that people and organizers and communities have been doing for a long time to push back against surveillance of youth, surveillance of queer people, surveillance of folks who've been impacted by the prison industrial complex. So again, we really hope that this tool can be used for your folks and folks who are organizing, folks across the country. But we're approaching time. We want to make sure we have enough time for the Q&A. So I think, Alex, I'll give it to you if you want to wrap us up with maybe one, maybe two questions, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Basma. To wrap it all up, I'm going to open this question up for everyone. I know this year has been hectic and is going to continue to get hectic. What's on the horizon for everyone else, or what are you guys planning in terms of in your work for the rest of the 2020 year?
I can start. So we have been, like I said earlier, we have been organizing around, New York, New Jersey, to, free people. We are continuing to do that for the rest of the year, and then we'll see what next year will hold for us. So we actually have been having a phone zap every Friday that started since COVID, since around March or April, if I'm not mistaken. And every Friday we change our targets, elected officials, ICE field office directors, calling them and demanding that they free everybody, they free people that are locked up in detention. And we have been, starting to see some good, results from the efforts of this phones app. And so the Elizabeth Detention Center facility owner sent an email to one of the phones app that we made to them, saying that they are going to, cut their ties with Core Civic, which is the company that manages Elizabeth Detention Center. We think that that is a good, at least a good step to the right direction, that, Elizabeth Detention, which have been in existence for over 25 years, will hopefully be, ending anytime soon. And so not just Elizabeth Detention, but all the facilities in New York and New Jersey, we are also targeting all of them. And we are continuing to make sure and pressure elected officials and make sure that they sign, the governors of New York and New Jersey sign this executive order that immigrant rights organizations in New York and New Jersey have come together to work on, which are demanding the release of people, ending of transfer, and also ending ICE renewal of contract in New York and New Jersey. So those are some of the efforts that we, as coalition, New York and New Jersey are going to be focusing on in 2020. We are planning for an in-person action sometime in August. We actually had a press conference on Monday, this Monday, where we wanted to create awareness on these issues and also the executive order. And like I said, we're planning an action. Hopefully folks will be able to get more, updates around that. And of course, QDEP as an organization, we are continuing our work, which is providing support and services for LGBTQ immigrants that are coming to the country, those that are locked up in detention, and those that are maybe out of detention. We are continuing to do our work to kind of build our membership base, because we cannot do the work alone. We need people, we need supporters, we need volunteers that would help us fight this systemic oppression.
And YaYa is working currently in the Dignity in Schools Coalition to largely organize around budget justice, to demand the defunding of the police and funding education instead. And we've been working around this throughout the entire quarantine period, and we will continue working on it until there is a just budget brought to the city. YaYa has also been working on reworking ambiguous policies like Chancellor's Regulation A432, which it lays out the protocols of how scanning is performed in New York City public schools, and we're reworking it to ensure the safety of students and make sure that, to the very least, they aren't taken advantage of. And we've also just recently joined a health justice coalition in which we will advocate for fully online schools in the fall, just to ensure the safety of teachers, faculty, and students alike. Or to at least have some kind of plan that, again, goes back to budgeting, fully funds schools, and so that if we are going to be in person, we have enough resources to ensure the safety of everybody. I can share our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook in the chat, but YaYa is also will be working on a lot of media projects that will be starting up later this year. And yes, so I'll plug the social medias in the chat.
Thanks, Jillian. And James and Emmett, if either of you want to talk a little bit about what Challenging E-carceration has planned, what are the ways y'all are continuing around the work that you've been doing?
So one of the things that we're working on right now is actually a hotspot map, where we're working to point out notable sites of electronic monitoring around the country, and sort of hope to fold in some of the COVID-related EM data as well. And James, I think you want to talk a bit about the push to sort of incarcerate there?
Yeah, so, I mean, one of the things that we've noticed is that in most states, I know it's the case in New York, that very little has been done to get people out of prison in this, COVID intensive time. So we want to step up our efforts to press for decarceration, getting people out of prison without strings attached, without electronic monitors, and that is a thrust of the abolition work that we're doing. The other piece that media justice is involved in is pushing back against a lot of the targeting and profiling of Black political activists that grew out of the FBI categorization of certain people as BIE, the so-called terrorist independent Black. I've forgotten what the BIE stands for. Help me, somebody.
Black identity extremists.
Black identity extremists. My bad. Thank you. But so we've been pushing against that, and also supporting people trying to block the use of facial recognition technology, which is one of those technologies that has no good purpose. There's no good usage of this technology. It just must be banned. So a number of places have pushed for that, and we want to continue to build on that momentum.
And I think recently in New York, actually, officially New York State schools have officially banned, they were trying to use facial recognition software, and we've seen that's been banned, and it's obviously picking up steam. I know our folks out in Portland have been working a lot around banning facial recognition there as well. So I think Uche had one more thing that he wanted to add before we go ahead and switch into our Q&A. So Uche?
Yeah, thank you. I also just wanted to, bring the fact that QDEP last year launched a leadership development program for transgender women, cisgender queer women, and also gender non-conforming folks, because over time we have seen that these communities most times are underrepresented. Sometimes their voices are not being heard. So we see the need to give, tools to this community that they're able to really organize to challenge some of these systems that affect them, that affect us as queer people. This year alone, we have seen like I don't know how many right now, but like the number of trans people that have been killed this year is alarming, right? So we need to keep advocating and organizing around declaring justice for all the trans people that have been killed in the US. So we are continuing to do that this year. We are launching the second cohort of that program, which will be starting sometime in October. And the goal is to again keep giving leadership tools to our members, that identify as TGNC and also cisgender queer women, so that they're able to really fight this system. I will be sharing our social media information on the chat box, so you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram to learn more about our work. And also, if you have any question, you feel free to email me. I will still drop my email. If you want to register to this to be part of this program, or you have friends that you think might benefit to this leadership program, you feel free to share the link with them for them to register. Thank you.
Thank you, Uche. Okay, we are getting very close to our time. I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for question and answer. So if you do have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A box. We'll go ahead and get started with one. Also for folks on Facebook Live, you can go ahead and add your questions there too. So first question was around facial recognition and racial bias. So if folks could speak a little bit more about the research around the racial bias that's connected to facial recognition software and surveillance. And actually, let me go ahead and share the second question as well, so we can take two at a time. So Bernard is asking for the organizers on the panel, how have you engaged fellow community members who are in support of e-carceration and or surveillance as a means of public safety? So first question around racial bias and facial recognition, and the second one is, what happens when folks are actually advocating or pushing, folks from our communities are pushing for e-carceration technologies? So we can start with those two. And anyone can feel free to jump in.
In regards to Renard's question, in interviewing a lot of people across the city and a lot of students, we found that some students did think that metal detectors, some students and some people did push back and say like, well, metal detectors might keep us safe. Like what if, there's a weapon that is stopped through metal detectors? And, when engaging with them, we had a meaningful conversation about how the policies and the placement of metal detectors looked and what the actual issue was, which was the racial bias and the disproportionate amounts of metal detectors in Black and Brown communities as opposed to white communities. So we had that conversation, and so a lot of people, although they thought that maybe it was a means of safety, they did agree that something had to change, like something in the policies had to change so that it wasn't like racially charged, or it wasn't like a disproportionate placement of the metal detectors.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Thanks, Jillian.
And I want to add to that. So the first question, I don't think I would be able to respond to that, but I think Basma just dropped a link to that. But to the second question, we have similar experience that's with what Gillian just shared. So with QDEP, we are always, our goal is to make sure that we center the voices of our members that have been impacted by this system in the work that we do, especially around organizing and abolition. But from when we had some of our organizing meetings, and some of the things that we saw from our members, or the argument was around, people commit crime, they should go to prison, people commit crime, they should go to jail. But we're able to really educate them and let them understand that there are reasons why people, commit crime, that we need to, start talking about how to address the root cause of these, issues. If the government should start focusing on how to invest money in the community, reforming the school system, creating jobs for the community that don't have, a lot of community, especially, immigrant community, Black and Brown folks, are not able to secure a job because maybe they've had some criminal history and all of that. So if the government should start tracking or tackling those root cause, and also, creating affordable and sustainable housing for the community, that alone will reduce the crime rate in the country. And again, for immigrant community that are just only coming here for safety, coming here to seek protection, there is no reason, or there's no reason that they should be held in prison or in jails for months or even years, as case may be. And so we're able to really help them understand that there is actually a system that have been set up and make sure that Black and Brown folks to go to prison, Black and Brown folks to go to jail. So we need to start thinking about how to challenge and change those systems. That is the only way that we can, then start talking about safety and also freedom within the community as a whole. And they were able to really understand, because most of us that come here, we don't know some of the history, some of the things that has happened in the past. We don't even know about this system. We just come here and then we start experiencing them, right?
Yeah, I would actually like to respond a bit to that question as well. I think a lot of times when people are talking about supporting surveillance, supporting e-carceration, and seeing that as a viable alternative, they're sort of stuck in this paradigm of what the police do. And the police react to situations, right? They intercede at a moment where something has already happened. And I think when I've talked to people, talking about actually interceding before that happens, right? As which I mentioned, to intercede in the community, to provide services and resources for people to access, to make it so the things that happen never happen in the first place. I think one great example is the way that the police are often used as like mental health crisis responders, often to terrible results, right? We see that people with mental health issues are 16 times more likely to be killed by the police than other people. But you see in other places, Seattle, for example, has cahoots where trained responders actually come in and intercede, and so they never have any contact, with the police. And I think focusing on the things that could be beneficial to the community to prevent the situations from ever happening in the first place, and just talking about how we could actually use the billions of dollars that we use militarizing the police to invest that in the communities, and how that would prevent all these problems, it's been pretty effective.
Absolutely. And I think, on that tip as well, as we're seeing certain cities kind of actually appease and start to like shift in terms of abolition, we also need to be super vigilant and aware that, in the same way that replacing a physical jail with an electronic one, replacing a physical police department with just more surveillance and the quote unquote Camden model, that type of policing also is not safety. And I think you're definitely hitting, the nail on the head. And it really does come to how we've been socialized and conditioned to sort of seeing the role of police, and that this distrust that I think Aniri, like I mentioned earlier, that we have of each other, or seeing, students walking through metal detectors or folks with ankle shackles, that there's this assumption of, you did something to deserve this, when, the root causes of all of these issues are completely ignored. And so, yes, so many things. I feel like there's a lot we could talk about. We only have a couple more minutes. And so I just wanted to really thank everyone who made this webinar, who made the poster project a reality. A lot of appreciation to our panelists. So thank you, even though we can't actually applaud, but thank you to everyone. Special thanks to our interpreting team. Really appreciate the accessibility, folks who've been helping on the back end. And I know some people have dropped the links in the chat. So if you, want to follow and keep in touch with YaYa Network, Queer Detainee Empowerment Project, Community Justice Challenging Incarceration, Freedom to Thrive, please stay in touch. We do want to continue to be in conversation and to organize with each other. And finally, if you want a copy of the poster, we've got 1,000 of them or thousands of them. We want to get them out. So feel free to send us an email. You can contact Catherine. She's put her info in the chat as well. We'd be more than happy to mail them out. And if, again, if you're especially working with folks who this might be a new issue, a new topic, we would love to help support in kind of the political education that goes into this. So with that, I think we can go ahead and close. Yeah, again, thank you. Well, actually, sorry, I have one announcement for folks. Freedom to Thrive has been doing some support work around Usman Darbo's case here in New York, New Jersey. Usman is an immigrant Muslim man from the Bronx who's been detained in Bergen County Jail. It'll be 3 years on Friday. And so when we're talking about school to prison pipeline, when we're talking about e-carceration, we're talking about the connection between the criminal legal system and the immigration system. Usman has been facing a lot of these challenges. And, we've been supporting efforts to free them all. On Friday, we're having a digital rally and a press conference, really trying to put pressure on ICE to release Usman and to release everyone from detention and incarceration. So we can drop the link as well in the chat, so folks can join the phones app the way that Uche had mentioned as well. And I think that's actually all I have. So again, big thank you to everyone, much appreciation, and we hope to stay in touch and see everyone soon.